Why does everything I like have to be infested with ass clowns? This is a question I regularly ask myself these days, as no matter where you go on the World Wide Web, somewhere in some community, there's some little twiddle fuck that's making enjoying a thing a headache for everyone else. And no fandom, I feel, is a greater example of that than the Power Rangers fandom. But this video isn't about the Power Rangers fandom. This is a video about the people who have been following live action adaptations of DC Comics for the last 10 years. Because as I've stated before on the channel, I am a DC fan first and foremost when it comes to comic book superheroes. The first thing I ever saw that could be considered superhero media that made me interested in superheroes and comic books and all that fun stuff was the Justice League Unlimited animated series. And ever since then, I've held a soft spot for all the characters showcased in that show and their extended families of characters above all others. But it's been a hard 10 years as a DC fan of sort of secondhand embarrassment and headache after headache and false start after false start, and I figure it might be interesting to recap that a little bit for some of you who don't keep up with this every week like the psychotic that I am. You see, back in 2012 when Christopher Nolan bowed out after finishing his Dark Knight trilogy and Zack Snyder came in to do Man of Steel, it seemed like a slightly optimistic time. It seemed like we were going to start getting a handle on things in sort of the same way that Marvel had already done and build a more cohesive and interesting universe. And while I still like Man of Steel, my opinion on it hasn't aged too well. I was mixed on it at first, and then I sort of started liking it, and then as the discourse grew and grew and grew, and to the point of a headache, and then I had an absolutely soul-crushing experience watching Batman v Superman, I just kind of soured on it again, which is just how these things do tend to go for me. Because a big part of the appeal of the DC Universe to me is its bright and optimistic nature, of how the characters are meant to be examples for you to strive towards and are meant to paint a picture of a better world. So when you show me a version of Superman who's not a down-to-earth farm boy with too many powers and is just a sad alien boy who only really perks up when he gets to get in a bathtub with his hot redhead girlfriend, and a version of Batman who's not an iron-willed crusader for justice, but instead is a psychotic vigilante who brands people and is okay with guns on the Batmobile, and a version of Wonder Woman who's just a warrior and has no ideology to her, then it's not really going to interest me. And that's why I ended up just quitting right there with Snyder's version of the DC Universe. I didn't go see either of the Wonder Woman movies. I didn't see Justice League. I didn't see Suicide Squad. And that was all despite minor temptation here and there from friends who did give favorable reports to some of those pictures. And it's probably pretty good that I didn't, because I would have gotten sucked into the discourse of the time, which was all based around the fact that the people who actually saw Justice League, which only did mediocrely at the box office, actually liked its lighter tone for the most part that came about because Zack Snyder tragically had to step away from the project due to a family event, and well, they brought in Joss Whedon, the Marvel guy as he was known at the time, to keep the film on schedule and give it a tone that would more appeal to mass audiences, changing little things about the movie here and there, and overall cutting down its runtime, which just put the hardline Zack Snyder fans into an absolute furor, which is what earned them the reputation they tend to have around the internet these days. And I don't even really have to explain it, because we've all heard the constant knee-jerk reactions to even the slightest criticism of, you just don't get it. You don't understand his passion for the characters and his grand plan for the DC universe that come whenever you say anything mildly disparaging about a Snyder fan in front of one of these incessant, cockroach-like, slack-jawed, monkey-humping yes-men. And I don't use those insults lightly, because you have to remember, this is a group of people who, instead of accepting the fact that a corporate entity wanted to go a different way with a property that they had no real control over, instead chose to whine and complain about how we'd all love Justice League and see it as a masterpiece if only Zack could have done it the way he wanted to, and started up a grassroots campaign to hashtag release the Snyder Cut, even though at the time Snyder himself said he was okay with moving on to other projects. But no, eventually they got their way, because Warner Brothers was in the middle of the first of many corporate shakeups at the time, and the new ownership decided, hey, here's something we can exploit to get a little quick cash and keep the lights on for a little bit. But I think that's the worst decision they actually could have made, because it only showed those people that if they just complain loudly, consistently, and longly enough, then they would inevitably get their way. And it led them to immediately move on to demanding a new director's cut for the David Ayer Suicide Squad project. Never mind that there was already a sequel with a new director on the way, and so Warner Brothers probably wouldn't want to muddy the waters with two projects basically under the same name coming out at the same time. But you know, it's actually a little funny, because right around when the Snyder Cut came out was when I started dipping my toes back into the live-action DC gene pool, because just before then was when the first live-action Shazam movie released, and it looked fun, it looked interesting, it looked like a dynamic new take on the character that didn't betray who they were at their core, and I think the actual movie did a good job of being that. It's not a perfect superhero film, but it's a pretty decent Shazam film for the modern era. And the same can be said of The Batman and The Suicide Squad. I think they both do a good job of taking the building blocks that were left from the Snyderverse at that point and building something really good, or just starting from scratch and taking inspiration from all over the comics to craft a brilliant original new take. But of course things couldn't just pick up from there, because that was when the pandemic happened and when Warner Brothers was back at it, just continuing to play corporate musical chairs. And finally, towards the end of things, we got a new CEO installed who kept saying how he wanted to establish a Kevin Feige for DC. Never mind the fact that DC Warner Brothers executives had been saying that since the Nolan trilogy was new, and the fact that one of the names he threw around was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. You know, the guy they cast as Black Adam in a movie all about Black Adam years before a Shazam movie was even in development. And being on the other side of the whole Black Adam fiasco now, I have to say, God, am I glad they chose not to go with Dwayne after his movie underperformed, because after it underperformed and then Shazam 2 came out and underperformed, we found out all kinds of juicy behind-the-scenes details, like the fact that the crew of the Black Adam movie was just made up of longtime friends of Dwayne and yes men, and that he was only really using it as a power play to get control of DC and thus also have control of Warner Brothers. Even going so far as to say that the only Shazam related character besides Black Adam to be in the Black Adam movie should be the Wizard, to stonewall other DC characters from Black Adam's movie from cameoing in the second Shazam movie, and to flat out refuse to cameo as Black Adam in the Shazam movie, even though Shazam is the hero that usually fights Black Adam, and that those two are in the comics generally incredibly minor characters to the greater DC universe. No, we have to drag Henry Cavill back into this mess and have him cameo at the end of Black Adam to tease Superman and Black Adam fighting, because that's what people want to see.
So what are you shooting here for?
I'm actually, interesting that you brought up Batman, I'm actually doing a video kind of overviewing the last 10 years of live-action DC content since Man of Steel, and sort of how people have reacted to it and how discussing that content has become a complete headache. And I'm hopeful the new regime will actually be interesting and exciting like the Marvel stuff tends to be. And just as a quick aside, I do feel bad for Henry Cavill basically being a pawn in this whole thing and just wanting to give a proper portrayal of Superman the whole time. But also, he's a big name Hollywood actor who has lots of money, and he has other projects based on his interests lined up now. So it's not the end of the world that he's not going to get to do another Superman movie, in my opinion. And that, of course, brings us to the modern times, where James Gunn and Peter Safran have been made the co-CEOs of DC Studios, which is now an entirely separate company from Warner Brothers that just gets backing from them. And, yeah, I'm actually feeling a lot more positive about this new direction, because it's an actual direction with a clear voice and goals that feels very similarly exciting, but tonally distinct from Marvel. I mean, right out the gate, you have what I think are incredibly smart creative choices in saying that stuff like Joker and the Batman are in their own separate DC Elseworlds, but we are going to be building a DC universe from here on out that has actors portraying the same roles both in live action and in animation, and is going to have the creative emphasis placed on the writers rather than the directors. There's just so many little hits there that make this feel much more in lockstep with what I would want from a modern live action adaptation of the DC universe, when for years I've been saying the Snyderverse being bad doesn't really matter to me, because I already got a really good adaptation of the DC universe in the form of the Bruce Timm universe. And yeah, that stuff is great. I treasure that with all my nostalgia I can possibly muster, but there's nothing quite like being excited for new product, is there? And by that I mean, of course, there's nothing quite like having to defend new product to idiots on the internet, because of course people have to make this into more of a headache than it needs to be. With the Snyderverse not even being fully out of our systems yet, and not a single project entirely developed under this new regime being released yet, we still have a brand new Snyder Cult campaign to sell the Snyderverse to Netflix. Whatever the hell that means, because newsflash, people, Zack doesn't own those characters. Warner Brothers does. And they're not about to sell the concept of adapting them in live action to one of their biggest competitors, who also has been regularly shooting themselves in the foot over the last couple years. I mean, take it from me, a hardline Power Rangers fan, I would not want any other fandom to have their property attached to Netflix, despite being very excited for once and always, because they have a constant pick up and drop release strategy. They've been moving more and more to an ad-based model recently, and oh yeah, they got rid of password sharing, one of the main appealing things about streaming services, being able to just say to somebody, hey, here, hop on my account and check it out, and then if you like it, maybe you could get an account yourself, or you could pick up a physical copy if that's your jam. And that's without even getting into how annoying people have reacted to Gunn's honestly quite refreshing open strategy of just being clear with people where they are in the process on social media by constantly turning every tweet the man posts into a clickbait article and spreading casting rumors in the hopes that he will confirm or deny them so you can make a clickbait article out of that like some kind of fallen from grace clout-chasing cunt. I know it probably comes off very biased that I spent the front half of this video just going to town on Snyder and Johnson, and now I'm just praising Gunn and Safran and defending their strategies, but like, most of the cape shit that Gunn and Safran have worked on, I've liked. Zack Snyder has exactly one adaptation I still like, and it's not even in his DC universe. It's his 300 adaptation. And Dwayne, yeah, he's a pretty charismatic guy, but that's about all he has going for him. His wrestling career was brief but cool, and his acting career has been nothing but coasting on that charisma and just playing the same kind of character over and over again until Black Adam, when he suddenly decided to play against type and create the most awkward, mediocre, mid-2000s ass superhero movie I've seen so far this decade. But I guess if I were to be a little bit critical of the new direction of DC Studios, I would say I don't know if Gunn's the best choice to write and direct Superman, because he tends to lean more towards comedy and horror stylistically, and I don't know if that's what I want from a Superman movie. But after that big Twitter thread he posted where he confirmed he was going to be directing it, I'm kind of inclined to let him cook, because he seems genuinely passionate about the character and the universe and about comic books in general. And I mean, in that big slate video, he also announced that they're making an adaptation of my favorite comic about my favorite fictional character of all time. So that's at least 24 brownie points right there. But even after that backtracking, I will say this one criticism I have to Gunn and Safran, or more like a request to Gunn and Safran to end off the video. Once Flash finally comes out, could we please give the boot to the actual war criminal and serial kidnappers playing Wonder Woman and the Flash? Because unless they've made a big public effort to apologize for those things and be better that I somehow missed, they're not the kind of people who should be playing those characters. At all. Don't get me wrong, I am of the opinion that people can and should be allowed to grow and change as they get older, but I haven't exactly seen a lot of remorse from Godot or Miller. I've only heard stories of Miller using their Hollywood money to pay their victims off and never speak about it or bring a lawsuit to them, which, again, not something I would think Barry Allen would fucking do. I don't know, maybe it's a tad hypocritical of me to come down that hard when I am low-key planning on checking out The Flash when it hits theaters, because it looks like it's at least a fun movie starring a dipshit, even if it is starring a dipshit asshole serial kidnapper. But that's just the way it goes. In all of this, I think the big takeaway is, well, exactly how the song goes. You take the good, you take the bad, and that's the facts of being a fucking DC fan, I guess. I'm the Vacuuminator, reminding you that you never fail until you stop trying. And I guess that's why I never truly stopped trying to hope that DC would get better, and why I'm not gonna stop hoping that it'll get better, no matter how weird or homogenous or awkward or transitional times are. Till next time.